Okay.
Yeah, I was taking a picture of you, filming me.
So, where were you when the big event occurred?
Yeah.
What's your alibi?
Yeah, my alibi. I was 8 years old.
Okay.
But no. This is important.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I will tell you why. I was 8 years old, and I live in Porto, which is the town where Sá Carneiro, the prime minister, was from. He was natural from Porto, and my family was pro Sá Carneiro. More than being a social democratic, Sá Carneiro was a figure. He was a charismatic leader of the party. So the party was also his name, much more than social democratic. The thing is, I was 8 years old, and this is important. Why? The following day, the next day, my best friend didn't went to school. Why? Because his father was the pilot of a second plane. And since that day, I knew as a child, as growing up and being as a journalist, I always knew that there was a second plane, same size, same model, a Cessna, as the plane that went down. And every journalist seemed to have forgotten that fact. And for me, it is a fact that helped me, or even, let me say, kept on insisting that I should investigate this history. That is why I still have this idea of going into deep of Camarate. It is a thing of my own also, as a growing Portuguese. Before being a journalist, it is a memory that I have from childhood. Now you want to know what did I find?
Yeah, what did you find?
What did I find? Yeah, you see.
Findings of your investigation?
Yeah, you see, Jay. I was growing in this Portugal, this strange Portugal. When I was born, let me tell you, I was born in 1972. I was only 1.5 years when the revolution happened. So, well, all the major events, I didn't took part. I didn't participated directly. I was kind of a victim of the circumstance. So when I start growing, I was already feeling the impact of things that I didn't control. Therefore, I start to investigate what happened before when I was growing up, and what did the other journalists did their work, and if they did it well, why there was so many questions still to be answered. So I start digging that, and I found lots of bullshit. And that is the thing. I don't know what is the truth, what is the lie, but I do know we are into a deep pack of very dirty stuff here in Portugal, which prevents us from having a future nowadays, which I don't feel being a complete democracy in Portugal. When the death of a Portuguese prime minister is considered by the Portuguese parliament to be an attempt, a coup, a murder,
right.
And then the Portuguese society doesn't react to that. And then when I try to investigate, I go into walls. Therefore, it is also my job as a journalist to investigate why. And all I can do is share my experience as a journalist in this investigation, and ask for other people's help in order to get to some more facts. I already come too deep in facts here in Portugal that involves the United States and the Portuguese relations between Portugal and the United States, and maybe we can go further if this investigation comes to the United States, and finally somebody can take the torch of truth and investigate also in the United States. That's something that from Portugal, I cannot do more than this, what I have done so far.
And where does the Parliament stand on this?
Yeah.
There have been numerous Camarate commissions.
10 commissions. There were 10 commissions all over more than 30 years. Well, the most important commission, which I also kind of helped with some facts, it was in 2004. They reached to the conclusion that finally that there was a bomb inside the plane, and that was a killing. They think it could be the Minister of Defense, not the Prime Minister.
Who was the target? I
have doubts, because as I told you, my friend, the father of my friend, he was a pilot of a plane, a second plane from Porto. He was a private plane for a company of Porto, of a friend of Sacarneiro. And the plane came from Porto that morning and to Lisbon, 300 kilometers, and stayed all day in Lisbon just to take Sacarneiro up to the north, where he should go to a rally, to a political meeting for a rally, I would say, and then he would come back that same night because he was the prime minister, and this was presidential elections. This is a difference because in Portugal the president has no powers like in the United States. It's the prime minister decides the government. The president is the chief of government, but he is elected also. But this was kind of a presidential election, not for the government. Sacarneiro had already been elected for the government for a 4-year period on October. This all happened 2 months after, in December. So Sacarneiro didn't have the need to go to Porto, but people were telling him, you need to go to Porto, it's your hometown. And this will be an extra rally because there already had been a scheduled one the day before. So I do believe this was all arranged to put Sacarneiro in a plane, because they knew he had to go on a private plane. People will also argue on these days that he had tickets for a commercial plane. Yes, he did have those tickets, but it was just in case if there was bad weather that day and the private plane was not allowed to take to go.
Right.
So, and after the death, the newspaper started saying, oh, it changed in the last minute the commercial tickets to go on that plane, which was an official plane of the candidates. But it was also a rotten plane that had been bought months before in Venezuela, in the South America.
Right.
And it had been used by Carlos Andrés Pérez, the president of Venezuela, to do also his tour for a presidential race. So it had been bought by someone that knew that was a rotten place. I think the plane was already bought to fall, you know.
Yeah.
And this was a plan that was made much anticipated, because they will know that Sacarneiro would really travel on the plane during this political period of campaign.
Yeah, interesting enough, Perez was married to Marita Lorenz.
No, that's not Perez. That's
yeah.
Jiménez Perez. I'm talking about Carlos Andrés Pérez.
Okay, wrong
But
Perez.
what we have here is South American, yeah. But even so, we have a South American connection in Venezuela.
Right.
Look for who has good contacts with planes in South America in Venezuela, and who could be saying to somebody here in Portugal, oh, you want a good plane? We can get you a good plane in South America. That's where the plane that would crash in December was bought in May that year. For something that we know it was scheduled since April that was going to happen, which was the presidential elections in Portugal
Right.
in 1980. Now, 1980, this is also a very particular moment, and this is what I need people in America to investigate. What I've been so far here. In 2004, the Portuguese Parliament also, besides to the fact that there was a bomb inside the plane, came to the conclusion that the Minister of Defense, along with the Prime Minister, we might say, was investigating an illegal gun deal in Portugal. Now, on those days, what was the most illegal gun deal possible to happen in the world? And especially using Portugal as a place of just a turning, we could say the airport of Lisbon was used just to, planes would come in and go out. Just the middleman, middle way country. Now, it is what is still today a taboo in America. It's the October surprise of 1980, the non-re-election of Jimmy Carter and the election of Ronald Reagan and George Bush, especially George Bush. Now, you have this strange coincidence on those days. The number 2 in CIA was Frank Carlucci. He had been ambassador to Portugal since 75. Till 75, till 77, Carlucci was the ambassador in Portugal. He knew Sacarneiro. And it is a fact that they didn't get along. The man of Carlucci, another fact, political accepted, this is not a speculation, this is our facts of our political tradition in this, it's very well here, was a socialist called Mário Soares. And this was an adversary of Sacarneiro. Sacarneiro was not a man from the Americans. He was a patriot of Portuguese. we could say. And to America, Portugal is very important. You have to remember also another fact. In 1949, when NATO was founded, Portugal was a dictatorship, and still we became members of NATO. So NATO accepted Portugal as being a fascist regime in their womb.
Were they neutral during World War II?
Portugal was neutral during World War II because we still have what is still today the most oldest diplomatic treaty in the world, signed in the 14th century between Portugal and England. Henry the Navigator, he was half British, half Portuguese. So this is why Portugal turned their backs to Spain. And we are under the antenna of England and America. The Azores base in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean is an American base after the Second World War. That is why Portugal had to join NATO in order for the America to have a air carrier, which is the Azores base in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That was very important, for instance, in 1973, in October 1973, to help the war in Israel. Portugal was the only country to help Israel in 73, allowing the use by America of the Azores base. Well, we didn't allow, we had to allow. That was also another thing. Now, the thing is, when you have somebody as a prime minister in a country important as Portugal, strategically to NATO, who can say, wait, maybe I have a second opinion. Maybe I don't go along with all the games. Or maybe, wait, I want to know what's really going on. Or start making too many questions. And especially in the very sensitive days like 1980, when there was the Iron contract, that is later, but the Iron hostages that were arrested on November the 4th, 1979, and stay all year of 1980 without Jimmy Carter being able to release them. And on election day, on November the 4th, 1980, a year went by and Jimmy Carter was not able to release the hostage in Iran, and he lost the elections. Now, still today, people discuss if there was a negotiation, a secret negotiation between the candidates from the Republican side, along with George Bush and all these CIA contacts, in Paris in October of 1980, in order to not release the hostage, and they would get guns to fight against Iraq, which the war had started 1 month before, on September 1980, in the middle of all this. And now, they would get guns. There was an embargo decreed by Jimmy Carter. And that to circumvent that embargo, Portugal would be the country, the very perfect country, to send illegal guns to Iran. And this is what the Prime Minister of Portugal and the Minister of Defense were investigating, or possibly would start investigating. This is what I don't know. What I do know is that the Portuguese Parliament said that the day after the death of the Portuguese Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense on December the 4th, guns were sent from Portugal to Iran. This already had been the day after November, when Jimmy Carter was no longer, let's say, future President of the United States, but he was still the acting President. The release of the hostage, if you remember, was minutes after the swearing-in of Ronald Reagan in 1981, January 1981.
Right.
Camarate happened in the middle of the election of Jimmy Carter and before the swearing-in of Ronald Reagan. Now imagine that if a Portuguese Prime Minister or if somebody starts investigating before the swearing-in of Ronald Reagan, say, hey, you riddled the 1980 elections. You stole the elections to Jimmy Carter. And you negotiated with Iran. How the world would react in 1980. How the world will react today. You know, this is the secret of Lisbon. This is the Lisbon Gate, if you want.
Right.
Now, the work you're doing, investigating, asking about those two men that probably knew what they would do. I don't know what José Esteves knows. I don't know what Fernando Farinha Simões knows. But I do know that if they know anything, or even if they don't know, and they are just grabbing because they have very difficult lives, and some of them, Fernando is even in jail in this moment for other subjects, and maybe he's doing this just to fight on. The thing is, there is documents that America must have. Even to say, we don't know nothing, but they can show us. What did the American ambassador on those days knew about Camarate, or what was his opinion, what did he heard from the first moments. That is very important today. It's been more than 35 years. Why can't we see those documents? What's the danger in them? And that comes suspicious if you don't see why them. And even if we see them, maybe they will allow only a few of them, but there is others that we may not be able to touch them yet. But we have the entitled to know if they exist, because there is too many suspicions and too many smoke. And when there's too many smoke, we have a saying, with too many smoke, there must be a fire somewhere. And this smoke, the screen, I mean, for instance, Frank Sturgis, the name Frank Sturgis, it never occurred to me. I never heard about Frank Sturgis before Camarate's situation. And it was Fernando Farinha Simões who said that he met Frank Sturgis. Then I just went to check out, and I saw a book about his life. And I saw there mentions to Portugal. And I asked to see some of the documents there of Frank. And then I saw Frank mentioning in 1977, while he was coming to Lisbon, long before Camarate, Frank was already coming to Lisbon, 1977. There is also records of him coming in 1981, after Camarate. So Frank knew all this thing about it. And then when I knew who Frank was, I said, and Frank was involved also with the people that said they were involved in Camarate, I said, well, someone has to clear up what is this. Even to say they didn't have nothing to do. But please, at least say officially they had nothing to do with it. Then this is just making questions. This is a child of 8 years old. I'm still a child with 8 years old making questions. Why? Why? I want my country back. I want my life back. I want justice for a crime of state, because our parliament decided it was a crime of state. So there must be someone who plotted, someone who did it. And if you have an ally, help us to find the truth. Help yourselves also. Do your own history, because otherwise America will always be like in the suspicious, and all with all the Americans. And I love America. I love the freedom of America. I love the example of America. But what I don't like is this secrecy. And I know that many Americans don't like it also.
Well, I try to obtain documents from the CIA on Simones and Esteves, and they said they would neither confirm nor deny the existence of these documents. So I filed a lawsuit in federal court, and I argued that Obama made an executive order saying that all documents after 25 years old should be declassified. And you know, I argued on several other points, but the CIA claimed the highest arguments for keeping them classified, saying national security, and if they're going to be classified, it has to go to the highest level in order to do so. And so I took them to federal court, and in federal court, the CIA, Mary Wilson of the CIA, wrote a declaration for the judge, in which she didn't say, that of course that CIA was involved, but the exemptions that she cited were, like she said, violations of national sovereignty, even though decades later will have tremendous repercussions, especially when an ally is involved.
Yeah.
And she virtually admitted that these documents existed.
Yeah, I do believe.
That, obviously it's Portugal we're talking about here, which is a NATO ally.
Yeah.
And so the judge was swayed by her arguments. Yet when he wrote his decision, he said that he didn't say, there's no documents, the CIA doesn't have documents on these gentlemen, but that to release them would implicate, he used the word implicate. The CIA in
this
Camarate, in an assassination of a foreign leader.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I don't know if the CIA might be or not be implicated. What I do know is the CIA is already mentioned a lot in this story. And one of the tactics of CIA is neither deny or confirm, which is good for everything. But we reach a moment where there is not an option to deny or confirm. We reach a moment where a sovereign state, a NATO member country, declared that the death of his prime minister in 1980 was an attempt on his life, a bomb.
Right.
And we don't know why, but we have also, and this is not by this José Esteves or Fernando Farinha Simões, but we have also people that are credible that said that the Portuguese Prime Minister was being under surveillance of the CIA in 1980, in the previous months before his death. And we know for a fact that number 2 in CIA was a former ambassador to Portugal. So what we know from these facts is that every time there is a communication between embassies and the State Department, or there is this death of a Portuguese Prime Minister, a NATO member, then I do believe CIA must, it should, I think, not must, it should investigate in order precisely to know if they were implicated or not.
Right.
Or someone working for the CIA but not being CIA, using CIA name abusively, might have been the person behind it. So it's good for CIA to clear their name, to show up and say what they know about it, and help the Portuguese Parliament that already went too far by declaring that Camarate was indeed a murder.
Right.
So if they declare it was a murder, what does now America do? That didn't they knew it was a murder? Or do they know it was a murder and they don't want to tell who he was? So this is the last chapter, the who did it now that we had to find. It's like I don't know if it was the butler, but they know they have the letter which says what happened.
Well, when Simones and Esteves came up with the name Frank Sturgis, that rang a bell with me because I had investigated the Kennedy assassination for many years and come to the conclusion that it was Frank Sturgis that fired the fatal shot that killed the President of the United States.
Well,
they didn't just pull his name out of a hat. And say, oh, we're going to blame it on somebody who was involved in Watergate.
Yeah.
Because Watergate, what was it? It was a burglary. It wasn't an assassination. Yeah. And the minute they said Frank Sturgis, I said, oh man, there's a good probability that he put these guys up to it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not.
And and Jim Hunt, Frank's nephew, provided a alibi for Frank.
Yeah.
On the day of the assassination, he provided it to the Rockefeller Commission. But the Rockefeller Commission determined that it couldn't be determined with certainty where Frank Sturgis was on that day because his alibi relied on family members who would lie for him. And then Jim Hunt called me up and said he was writing a book on his uncle, and that basically the book was going to say that he had lied to the Rockefeller Commission and he didn't see Frank Sturgis that day on November 22nd. But Frank had asked him to say, hey, do me a favor, if anybody asks you where I was, tell them I was in Miami.
Yeah.
So that kind of clinched it, aside from the fact that there's a picture of Frank Sturgis disguised as a tramp who's picked up 2 hours after the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
So if he killed the President of the United States, there's a good chance that he killed the Premier and the...
Oh yeah, well that I don't have a doubt. If there was, like somebody says, if there was somebody capable of doing it, would be you, Frank. All right. Now the thing is this.
And he wouldn't do anything unless the CIA gave him a green light.
Yeah.
He wouldn't do it on his own. And he couldn't. Where is he going to get that money to pay off the conspirators?
Yeah. The thing is, like the John Kennedy case, which is still a mystery for many people. Also, the Camarate case is a mystery, but it's about time to end with that mystery, precisely because of the example on Kennedy. Kennedy is too far away, maybe, for the documents and so on. 1980 is still going on. Some of the candidates, even Hillary Clinton, is a person from 1980. Her house was when the time her husband was in Little Rock, and there was the Mena airport being used by Barry Seal to make drug traffic. That was already in the 80s, okay? That was also the Iran-Contras, 6 years after Camarate. And this is the Bush family that we are already having here. So this is what led us to have this election today between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So 1980, the October surprise of 1980, is still very much alive. And actually, behind of us, it's the Ritz Hotel. What I do know about Frank Sturgis is that he was there in 1977. 3 years before the death of our Portuguese Prime Minister, and that he came to Lisbon in 1981. So we have this connection between GFK and the October surprise of 1980, and still today we are feeling the effects. So it's about time to wake up, to ask for our rights as a citizen, because if you pay taxes, you support the CIA. CIA works for you as a taxpayer, not the opposite. They don't work against you. They are your employees. So they have to uphold to you. They have to answer to you. In the last vision, they are an illegal agency, and they should be extinguished and be replaced by something more transparent and more democratic, we might say. Even maybe terrorism would finish finally.
So what do you think about the Sturgis connection?
I do think that Sturgis connection is pretty serious and should be at least thoroughly investigated, or finish with the suspicions, because as long as we keep the suspicions, we will never know the truth. So I think that there is too many things that we should know about Frank Sturgis that we don't know yet, and that should be also asked to the officially also be asked in order to know. Well, Frank died in 1993, so
right.
It was a few years ago. So maybe there is no more secrets about him, or is there any?
I think there's a whole mess of him.
I don't know what we are doing here, AJ. Or maybe we are just opening a Pandora box even higher than this one, but we are in the right track of history.
I would agree.
Let's go on.
And so it looks like the plot was arranged by Simones.
Well, about
you got that Rodriguez. How do you pronounce his name?
Well, Lee Rodriguez. Lee Rodriguez. He is a person from Pakistan origin,
Right.
but a Portuguese.
These guys are international narcotics traffickers.
Yeah.
And Esteves was a bomb maker.
Mm-hmm.
Today we went by a church where he planted a bomb.
And to blame to the communists.
Blame on the communists.
Yeah.
We know he knew how to make bombs. He had access to explosives because from Angola, from being part of that whole mercenary trip in Angola. And and Rodriguez was one who allegedly put the bomb up. Got dressed up as
a pilot and entered the airport and planted the bomb. Well, what I do know about the investigation in this, technically saying that's this.
How did their names first surface?
Well, this is the thing. Only in 1986, finally, the names of José Esteves finally surfaced publicly, and it was alleged. Fernando was in jail, and he made a confession, and he didn't show. He didn't assume his name in those days. The parliament kept him the name anonymous, but he pointed out José Esteves, who was then in Brazil, living in Brazil. And José still today claims that it was the judiciary police that cover up Camarate.
Right.
From the moment on, in the recent works in the Portuguese Parliament, there was a member of the judicial police that said before Christmas 1980, that is 20 days after the plane fall, he showed to his superior some of the findings that he had about what he thought might have happened. And he said there was a trace of fragments of the plane in straight line going from the end of the more or less the middle of the runway up to the place where the plane crashed. The plane crashed soon after it took off from the airport in Lisbon. What is assumed is this: the plane took off, and with the moment the landing gear retracted, something exploded, and the plane then first it went spinning and then it went down.
Right.
Okay, so there was these trails of burning material, little burning material, that made the perfect trail of till the shooting, till the fall place. So when this investigative agent showed this to his chief, he came up to the chief, said, "Have you never heard about the chimney effect?" What is that? When you have a bunch of debris going up in the air, then with the wind it goes and spreads them. So that is what happened.
Right, right.
And the agent was an agent. He said to his boss, "If that is your opinion, sir, it's okay." He knew what was going on.
Right.
So he knew that he was not allowed to touch on that wasp, that wasp nest. You see,
Right,
yeah,
right.
It was a wasp nest.
Didn't they bring in some explosive expert from Ireland?
They bring explosive from everywhere. Then they did
He finally
everything.
said-
They
someone
find
said
there
there was a cover-up.
there was a cover. Well, they say if you
Well,
want,
not the cover-up.
yeah, they say go look in the feet of the pilot, the debris, if there is debris, if of a shreddle in the feet of the pilot. So they exhumate the body, they remove the body and then they went on X-rays, and then later on other analysis and so on. And first, where they used to say, oh, that was something that while the plane was burning, we have to think the plane was burning, that dripped to his feet. That was covered, that dripped to his feet, or that was a nail from the where he was buried, the coffin where he's buried. So there was always an excuse, another excuse, a supplementary excuse.
Right.
The investigation was badly conducted since the beginning. Even for Portugal, we can say, if people think we are a third country, which we are not, we are a NATO country, no. So, but we have secrets, and we have people who are very loyal also to the ones who pay to them also, and maybe not loyal to the Portuguese that they should be. And that is the problem also. For instance, a former Portuguese Prime Minister who had been the President of the European Commission for 10 years, he now goes on to Goldman Sachs.
Right.
You see, so who owns him? To whom does he work for? So he doesn't. I don't think he ever worked for the Portuguese people who elect him as a prime minister, or for the Europeans that trust him as the president of the European Commission. So it's sad to have leaders like this in nowadays.
What do you think? Why didn't they get him in another fashion where they didn't have to kill so many other people at the same time?
I don't understand what.
In other words, why didn't they just take him out in a different fashion?
Oh,
where they didn't have to blow up an airplane?
No, but an airplane is a good way to kill
know,
people.
with
It's an accident. It's always an accident.